Hey everyone, and welcome to another edition of Cannabis Capitol's Pop Politics. I'm your host, Chris Egger, and tonight we're going to be focusing the panel discussion on the topic of surviving legalization. And it's something I think going into 2023, looking towards 2024 and another election cycle, we're going to be struggling as an industry to really make sense of the landscape of what it's going to take to form a successful business. And so tonight, I'm going to ask you to welcome this panel of thought leaders and industry professionals who are joining me tonight. And can we give them a hand and thank you all? To my right, we have Mr. Haddad. He is the founder and CEO of GreenPoint Holdings, a manufacturer based out of Long Beach. He's also the founder of the HIGHNMIGHTY Topicals brand. And finally, he is an active member of the Long Beach Collective Association and an expert in municipal and state tax policy. So welcome, Had.
Thank you, everybody. Pleasure to be here.
Next to me, to my left, I have Timeka Drew, who is the founder of Biko Cannabis. Biko flower or Biko cannabis?
Just Biko.
Just Biko, right on. And as well, she is somebody who is with the Department of Cannabis Regulation of the City of Los Angeles. Through her relationship with Oaksterdam University, she is a social equity applicant mentor. And she is also a social equity license holder for a retail operation in the City of Los Angeles. She's going to be here talking tonight about what she's working on coaching people about. So, Timeka, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And then finally, to my far left, we have Mr. Nam Tran, who is the CEO of Goodfellas, a distribution license that operates throughout the state of California, but is based in Santa Ana, Orange County. And also, he's going to get into it tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about it. He is the CEO and founder of the Network Show, which will be coming up for its inaugural event this coming April. And it's a business-to-business event, right? So, Nam Tran.
Yeah! Thanks for having me.
All right, and so tonight, one of the things, and we're going to start, and we're going to let Timeka go first. We'll be gentlemen about this. Timeka is representing Los Angeles in terms of a license holder from the City of Los Angeles who's very active in municipal policy there. Hab, a license holder very active in the municipal policy in the City of Long Beach. And Nam, who is very active in Santa Ana, but really throughout the state. So each one is going to kind of kick off the night, talk a little bit about Biko, and maybe what's going right now and where you're at with the municipality that you're operating in.
Yeah, well, I'll start off by saying the landscape right now is if you're surviving, you're thriving. So, Biko is surviving. So I really feel like being able to hold on, being able to be a brand that's been around now for over 2 years and continues to sell cannabis in this really tough environment is definitely a win. And I think we've got to keep looking at it that way. We can't expect really fast solves for the market problems that we're experiencing right now. But if we can keep holding on, we will definitely have a chance to be able to kind of show the new states coming online what a mature market looks like and how we weather these storms. And so we are those trailblazers and those thought leaders, and we've got to just keep holding on and continuing to find creative ways to survive.
Amen to that. And Nam, if you would just give us a little insight, what's Goodfellas about? What's been going right recently? Maybe even a little bit about this network show upcoming?
Yeah, so we're a small distro out of Santa Ana, and things have been going pretty well. We work with a bunch of farms from Northern California that are hard to get to, a bunch of small mom-and-pop farmers from the Triangle. But it's been difficult during these markets, obviously with just the market crash, pricing, everything's very difficult. And we had to figure other ways to make money. So out of necessity, we created the Network Show, which is LA's first B2B trade show. And it's a trade show more focused, really hyper-focused on connecting brands and distros with dispensaries and delivery services, right? There's not going to be anyone else allowed to attend other than those people. And really allowing them a space to create a relationship between them. And I think that's one of the problems in the industry today is from a distro side, right? I get to see the brand and the farmer. I get to see the dispensaries, delivery service, the retailers, and them just pointing the finger like, oh, they're making all the money. They're making all the money. But reality of it all, I sit in the middle and I watch both sides struggle. And this show is meant to connect them so they can understand they're just both human beings. They're both running mom and pop operations here, and they should support each other. And that's the way we're going to succeed.
Well, and it's interesting because we talk about this, but the corporate, select left California, right? Hab and I were talking about the hands-on owner operator, the person who has that real passion for the industry. It's good to see 2-3 survivors here right now, actually, and that's an important thing. And then, of course, everyone has gotten kind of siloed since 2016, when, as an industry, we gathered and our collective energy towards that ultimate goal of legalization, right? But since that time, to your point, we haven't really all been meeting on the common ground and seeing how we can, work together. So awesome! I'm glad that you're working on that. Hab, if you want to just give us a little bit of insight into GreenPoint and HIGHNMIGHTY and what you've gone through, and then I'm going to start digging on you on tax policy. So
Sure, absolutely. So GreenPoint Holdings, we're a manufacturer and distributor located in North Long Beach. Long Beach is unique in that it's one of the few cities, municipalities that kind of had an open application process. What I mean by that is because it was a public vote to allow cannabis licensees into the city, anybody could basically apply for a cannabis license as long as you had a property in the green zone. So the actual landscape in Long Beach it's thriving. There's a lot of licensees. There's a lot of active groups doing business and throughout California. So Long Beach is a very strong community of licensees. We meet regularly through the LBCA. We're networked together, and that network kind of, we're proud to be operators in Long Beach. We feel like we have a lot of firsts here. We were the first to kind of have that open application process, not necessarily for retail licenses, but anybody today, you could apply for a distribution license. You can apply for a manufacturing license. You just need a property in the green zone. And, it's still a long process. Nothing's easy in cannabis. We've all learned that. But it is an open enrollment. So with that network in Long Beach, GreenPoint has done, pretty good with regard to focusing, being hyper-focused on where the margins are. And we're a Type 6 manufacturer, so we basically had to focus. In the beginning, we did everything. We made pre-rolls for people. We made vape cartridges. We did a lot of white labeling. We extracted. But after years of operating now, we've realized there's only a few things that have enough margin in them where we could actually be surviving in. So we focused on our oil production because that's where it was agnostic. We didn't have to brand it. We just had to make good oil and it sold itself. Everybody needs oil to make their products. So for us, everybody, all the licensees in California are our customers. So we focused on that. We trying to do white labeling for everybody, you have to do thousands and thousands and thousands of units for those pennies to all add up. So we basically had to refocus on where the margins were for our company. We're a smaller mom and pop shop type operation. So we had to realize where our strengths were. And in doing that, we found where the survivability was. And like she was saying, surviving is thriving here. A lot of licensees have gone out of business or haven't even started their businesses. And as a result, we're kind of going through a contraction period in the cannabis industry. And that contraction period basically means people going out of business, people being bought up, purchased because they're distressed, a lot of tax liabilities. And so when you add it all up, people are just not operating or they're barely hanging on. And so if you can find that one niche that you can survive on, you just have to do it balls to the wall, sorry for the expression, 24/7, 7 days a week, and be nonstop and be hustlers at it.
Right on. So, Hab, that's a great jumping off point for getting into the topic tonight about surviving legalization. One of the things that you did on behalf of the LBCA was to chair, I believe, the Tax Reform Committee, or the Tax Committee, as we can call it. And, we've talked a lot about this, but I don't know if people have really had it broken down for them in a while, right? But, cannabis is not like every other industry. The layers of taxation that are going on at the state and at the municipal level, how hard has that made it to be successful? I mean, do you have to work 10 times harder? Talk to me a little bit about tax policy, where we're at today and what it's doing to the operator.
That's a great question, and it's a powerful question because with cannabis, we're unique in the sense we're taxed at every step of the chain, right? We are probably the only plant on earth that's taxed when it's grown, right? And then it's taxed when it's sold on a wholesale level. And then it's taxed when it's manufactured and distributed. And then it's taxed when it gets to the retail level. And it's taxed by your local municipality, your city you're in. It's also taxed by the state you live in. And then there's the federal IRS 280E tax code, which makes it impossible for you to really make a profit because you're only allowed to write off the cost of your goods, not necessarily your marketing costs or any costs normal businesses would take in running their business. And so with Long Beach specifically, with the support of the LBCA, we were able to actually address this with our municipality and lobby them to change the tax code. It wasn't an easy process. It took a very long time, but it basically took us to actually read the tax code and figure out what it actually meant. And when we realized the city of Long Beach was going to actually make more money than us as a distributor or a manufacturer, because they wanted, in the beginning, a 6% gross receipts tax. And that doesn't mean, if you bought something for $100 and sold it for $110, they're charging you 6% tax on that $110 as if that's all profit. But it's not. You only made $10, but they're charging you on that full $110. So the tax code did not allow for just a simple cost of goods deduction, and it still doesn't. But what we were successful in doing was lobbying the city to lowering it from a 6% gross receipt tax down to a 1% gross receipt tax. At least that's survivable. And so what that's done is it's sent a ripple effect to other municipalities for other operators to band together and lobby their cities to change their tax code. And then ultimately, the state of California finally figured out that taxing the plant when it's grown isn't such a good sustainable business model for this budding industry, pun intended. So they eliminated the cultivation tax. But what didn't happen is the cities that we're in didn't eliminate cultivation tax. So here in the city of Long Beach, we still pay $13 a square foot to grow cannabis, and it's due the minute you go live, not after you've grown it and sold it. You owe it the second you go live. So if you have a 10,000 square foot grow, you're paying $13 a square foot for that grow, $130,000, the second you plant one seed or plant one plant. So ultimately, it's untenable for a lot of people if they don't have a lot of investment support, a lot of capital behind them. A lot of us are mom and pops. We do this because we're passionate. We love cannabis. We do anything for it. But the tax code is so complex. You can't just think, oh, I like cannabis, let's get into business. You have to actually really understand business and the tax code around it.
Yeah, man, wow, right? That's a great insight into how onerous the taxation climate is in the state of California in regards to cannabis. And it's definitely something that I know that every operator, both successful and who had gone through a demise, has echoed that it's the one thing that really they felt is preventing the legal industry from rising. Nam, one of the things I know is you're deep in roots communities up there in the Emerald Triangle. You're up in Humboldt County and stuff. Did the elimination of the cultivation tax, is that helping up there? How are they doing in Northern California through this period?
To be honest, it's not helping much at all. Prices just continue to drop, and it didn't really help the small farmer. I'm pretty sure it helped the big farmer that's packaging up their own stuff, destroying their own stuff to their own dispensaries. It helped them because they don't have to now pay it. But the small farmer never really paid it in the past. The distro always took on that burden. So we didn't really see that help them. And it's sad.
I mean, you spend a lot of time up there, and we're here in Southern California, and there's a lot of indoor cultivation, and there's some outdoor, but not a lot in Southern California, right? Most of the communities have some form of indoor requirement. Are you seeing people go out? Are they keeping fallow? Are they not planning? Are they letting their licenses lapse? I mean, what's the deal up there?
You're seeing a mixture. You're seeing some guys just calling it quits, some guys calling it pause, or you see a lot of greenhouse guys where instead of running 2 to 3 runs a year, they're just down to 1 run. Minimal risk on financial investment. They grow during the peak of the season. They're guaranteed the best quality. They don't have to worry about other stuff. So that's why you're seeing a shortage in production this year, right? A little bit right now. We're kind of seeing the start of a drought. Potential drought, which is good because prices go up. It helps the farmers, and we all, at the end of the day, we as an industry have to see the farmers succeed. They're the start of it all. Without them, we don't have anything, right? So I encourage all distros out there, try to get your farmers the best dollar. Dispensaries, delivery service, try to make sure the brands get paid, and they get the best dollar. It goes down the line. It helps the whole entire industry. And trust me, if we stuck to that policy, that type of philosophy, you'll see everybody succeed. Because buying a $5 eighth and selling it for 10, you made $5 hypothetically, right? Gross. Buying it for $12.50 and selling it for $25, you made $12.50 on that transaction. It's a lot better, right? And we have to see that. And that allows the farmer to have more money, which they can perfect their craft better. And us as end consumers, right? People that consume, we get better quality flour. It's grown better. It's done better for the environment. It's just better.
So right on. And Timeka, right? So this is something that we can maybe segue into the idea of if I'm an equity applicant or an applicant in general, because you're working with social equity applicants through your role at Oaksterdam, but taxation, that's the first place I would imagine, but it's not the only place where the municipal and state regulatory process will come into impacting operations, right? So how are you getting people prepared for this landscape?
Well, it's interesting, the tax landscape is incredibly scary for any applicant, right? You have to learn kind of about it. But I think one of the things we don't talk about enough when we talk about taxes is how taxes are actually used as a promise to cities who are not allowing cannabis, right? So it's like one of these ways that even though it can be very difficult for operators, when we're wanting to press into new cities and we're wanting to create social equity programs in those cities, one of the only things that we can say to them is, hey, look, you're going to be able to get a lot of tax revenue for this. And that is very, very real, right? The tax around cannabis in this country is a multi-billion-dollar industry. In California alone, there was, $1.2 billion in taxes in 2021. In the entire country, we have over $10 billion worth of taxes collected for cannabis in all the legal states. And I think another thing, for the equity community, and really for all licensees, something we should all be talking about a lot more is, how are those taxes being spent, right? Because we talk about the taxes, there's too many taxes, it's so much. This is a lot of money. And where the hell is it going, right? We're talking about a war on drugs and how we're supposed to be fighting against it. Some of that money sometimes is going towards this new kind of war on drugs, or to departments of corrections that have already made a lot of profits on the backs of people who were enslaved due to a war on drugs. So these are the questions and the activism we have to add into, I think, the tax conversation to make sure that it's holistic, and having these reasonable tax policies that we've been able to build and research and put together as a community are important to be able to present to these new municipalities and say, this is the good way to do it. This is the way that's going to cripple your operators.
For sure. And meaningfully, that's one of the things that I think you and I briefly touched on as we were getting ready for tonight's panel, which is when you see the tax dollars back into the local community where you have a boots on the ground operative presence, the community relations and that, the strength of it. But, the tax at the state level is, it's like as much as alcohol and tobacco combined in terms of an excise tax, and it's also being put on the medical plan, right? Do you think there's ever going to be a time when we're going to see meaningful tax reform from the state? Or do you feel like that could be something that could be beneficial to helping operators?
Well, I definitely think we'll see meaningful tax reform as long as the operators and the community continue to band together and really collectively organize. And we've seen how powerful the people who are organized in cannabis are, right? We've kind of brought all of this into fruition stemming from that medical advocacy in the medical community. So, I think the more that we make sure we're putting a focus on our medical patients as well, that are oftentimes forgotten as soon as adult use is passed, can continue to shine a light on some of these problems. I think that most people just are not thinking about when it comes to taxation.
Well, cool. And so, right, we've been talking a lot about, your knowledge of taxes and stuff like that. Do you have any perspective on what the state could potentially do to address changing that tax structure to be more in line with what we consider normal business practices?
Well, the hard part is the state is used to the money and they have budgets. And when they're used to the money and they have budgets, they don't like lowering line items and reducing those budgets. So that fight is difficult. And if you talk to politicians, they're nowhere near as acutely aware of the problems of our industry as we are. Like, they're actually relatively clueless. They might have general ideas, but we are in this day in, day out, talking cannabis, operating, seeing the struggle points, the hardships. They don't. And so to them, it requires a banding together of collectives to kind of address the problem and approach the state in a formal way, because it's a very expensive proposition to lobby initiatives with the state. So at Long Beach Collective Association, we do address that, but it's a very expensive battle. So we focus the battle locally. The local ripple has an effect on the state, but it takes a lot of time to approach the state to change and reform.
Well, and that's a good question. So after Long Beach, I think San Diego, San Francisco, there were a few cities that followed suit, right? After Long Beach reported its increase in revenues from a few things, right? There was some addition of retail into the community, right? And
we're actually very close in the city of Long Beach to have them either eliminate or lower drastically the cultivation tax that we talked about. So the state of California has already done that. It actually maybe hasn't helped some of the local farmer or small farmers, but as a manufacturer, it directly helped the sale of my distillate because it didn't have such a huge tax burden associated with that jar of oil. Because what happens is the farmer didn't pay that tax. It was transferred to the distro, which transferred to the manufacturer, transferred to the next distro. The last person that made it into a product actually had to pay that cultivation tax, which made the product more expensive. And then by the time it got to the dispensary has all that excise taxes and sales tax that they have to add, both locally and state taxes. So it's a compounding of taxes by the time it gets to the customer. So that's why when they walk out with a $25 item, it's close to $50, right? It's almost double. It's it's drastic. And so within the city of Long Beach, we're close to eliminating the cultivation tax or lowering it drastically. And we hope to lower the actual excise tax that the city is tacking on. You have to remember, there's cities that apply a tax, and then the state applies almost a similar tax right on top of that.
And eventually the federal government is going to impose a tax, which has kind of been part to their discussions, right, on legalization.
Correct.
Hey, wow. Hey, Nam, one of the things he just mentioned was collective, action and stuff like that. You mentioned out of necessity that the network show concept was born. Are you guys going to be addressing political, ideas there? And more importantly, it was, tell us a little bit about the idea of bringing Northern California and Southern California together.
We're not going to be having any panels or addressing any politics there. We eventually will, but I want to make sure that we survive first. And that's connecting the dots between the brands and the dispensaries, the delivery service, the retail partners, right? And just on the tax thing, the governments, they love money, right? They're going to get their tax no matter what. The biggest thing is it has to be a reasonable tax, and they have to get rid of the black market dispensaries and delivery service. They have to allow them an easier way of converting from traditional market to the legal market, either through some of the tax dollars funding them for their first couple of years of rent, offsetting something, or giving them a tax break, allows them to enter. If they enter and they join this side of the fence, then all the business will be there. There's no black market grows because they have no one to sell to, at least within the state.
And that's a good question. You know, we talk about taxes and all the burdens of being legal, but there's still, and we call it traditional, we call it illicit, we call it illegal, because I think there's variations of it, right? There's cartel grows that are like strip mining, natural habitat, destroying ecosystems. And I say cartel loosely. They could be just individuals who so choose to connect that way. Then there's people serving communities that are a desert for licensed, operations. We here at Cannabis Capitol are huge and firm advocates that every city in California should have access to some form of licensing to bring retail sales to their community, right? It should be that open. And I got to ask you, do you think it's going to take not a return to a war on drugs, but a new version of it, so to speak? Do you think higher penalties, or do you think lowering the threshold to the entry point is more relevant?
A little combination of both, right? You got to make sure the guys that don't want to convert, even though it's made easy for them, that they get punished. But the guys that should make it accessible, where it's easy for them to enter, just cross over, right?
And Timeka, I mean, there's a question, because you work in a social equity universe, right? People were unfairly and unduly impacted in many communities of color, but many communities can show demonstrated, numbers that show the impacts of it. And here we are in legalization now. I had Corvain Cooper, who was somebody who was serving life in prison, right, for cannabis sales at one point, sit on the stage and talk to me about, how prisoners feel about seeing people in the industry now. But at the same time, you heard what Nam said, and I think he's probably right. I mean, what can we do to help balance this out and move it all to the regulated side?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not okay to create a new war on drugs, right? And I think that we can't state that enough, because I think that there are a lot of people who actually do think it's okay to create a new war on drugs. And so I think we have to be clear about the fact that we in this industry don't all want the same thing. And a lot of times we like to talk about, the cannabis community. Sure, there is a cannabis community of business owners, but they do not all want regulations to look the same. They do not all want enforcement to look the same. They do not all want people of color to even be a part of the industry. Like, there are still, because we know that systemic racism still exists, because we know we're still using, racist ideologies to keep the plant out of communities that need to have access to it, we have to be very aware of that as we are continuing forward in, the way that we are deciding to take care of or address, people who are not licensed, who are operating. And I think part of it is really hard for any of us who are traditional or legacy operators, medical operators. It's like, where do we draw that line? So all of a sudden, like, we were all doing something that was highly illegal, and now some of us had the opportunity to get a license, and we're pretending like all these other people over here aren't like us, or they aren't a part of us. They are. They all are. So until we can start really kind of understanding that as a community as well, this us-them mentality is just creating more drama, I think, on the ground floor of what we need to be normalizing. I don't think that leads to the normalization that we want to see.
Gotcha. One of the things Long Beach has had seen success in transitioning to the legal market, right? Is it because of the free and open licensing that you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. It basically, as long as you had an address that you can use to apply, and if it was in the green zone, everybody was eligible. I think, there are people that don't want to convert to the licensed market, even if it was easier barrier to entry. But then there are people that want to, but that barrier to entry is high. And you have to understand, like, traditional market folks, they don't pay employment taxes. They pay people under the table. They don't have health insurance programs. They don't have a 401k. They don't have training programs per se. We're required to train our employees, right? There's so much that has to be done in a legal business. You just have to run a legitimate business, and that means you have to, you have to have a time clock, right? You have to have breaks. You have to have paid vacation times. You have to actually run a business, and if you try to apply that to the traditional market, the profits are lower, so nobody wants to do that, right? And as long as there are states that are illegal, there's always going to be an illicit market, because California, whether people realize it or not, most people in this room do, we supply most of the country, or let alone the world, with cannabis. So as long as there's states that are illegal, there's always going to be an illicit market. I don't know if more enforcement is the answer, because the war on drugs never worked, no matter which state or municipality you're in. The lower barrier to entry would help. Less taxes, so people actually shop in legal markets, would really help, but the state doesn't really get that concept. If they lower the taxes so that it's not that different to go from a traditional shop to a licensed shop, then actually people will shop in the licensed shops, and all of a sudden the tax revenue goes up as a result. They don't want to try it because they're too used to the money they got, and it's hard to get any government agency to lower a tax. It's just hard.
One thing that we do have to remember, though, is that, no municipality that we see that passes cannabis and that has cannabis taxes makes less money after they start, right? So no matter what, there are always more legal businesses opening and more people actually purchasing from those legal businesses. So like any other industry, those numbers are going to come. You can buy anything illicit on the street. You can go buy a DVD that is not, sold at Walmart, but it's sold on the street because it was, somebody had their video camera grabbing that. There's always going to be activity that is not a part of the systemic activity. And I think that's okay. I think we can still survive with some of that, especially as long as, what we're looking for to be kind of bringing that hammer down is something that's a little more reasonable. Thinking a little bit about what Corvain had to say about things, right?
And for me too, right? The one place that I get, and this goes up to Northern California, is the degradation of the water. There is a reason for CEQA. It doesn't make sense in the city to bring it up. But when you get into these really pristine natural environments, I have a very close friend who's been counting salmon in the Russian River for 17 years, 20 years with Scripps University, right? There's real impacts, right, from unregulated cultivation in Northern California. At the same time, there's real natural benefits from it too. And there's a struggle with that, right? Because we do come from a culture which says this is part of what our spirit is we are environmentalists as an industry. We're agribusiness people, right? Ultimately, we're holistic. We're medicinally we're medicinal mindset. California, since 1996, has been very progressive on that front, right? But at the same time, many of these cities that have the deserts too, I believe, an illicit operator there may be the holdover from Prop 215 era compliance. They may be serving a need there, and they may want regulation to come to their city, because that legacy investment is never going to be protected without the structure around it, right? And this is actually maybe a good time for us to address it. We're talking about surviving legalization right now, and it sounds to me like taxes are part of surviving, right? You have to be aware of them. We have to navigate them. It's probably a great place for us to put our time and effort into it. Opening new markets so that we can have more sales points for retail. But how important, and I'm going to start with you, Hab, and then I'm going to go down the line here, is federal reform to all of this? You talked about 280E. You talked about banking. Well, we didn't really talk about banking, but we can talk about banking. We talked about a new tax climate. Who knows who's going to ban interstate commerce, even if it's allowed, right? No one wants to see California dominate the entire country now that we have all these pockets. But let's get into federal for a second here, and we'll go down the line.
Absolutely. I go both ways on the federal legalization efforts. As an advocate, of course, I want federal legalization. I want cannabis legal in every state in the country. But then I get a little nervous about it. Like, on the positive side, I see banking opening up. I would love it if I can get a business loan. I would love it if I can get a conventional mortgage to the building that I own, instead of having to have a private investor that's like a shark that wants to take it over the second we falter, right? So having conventional banking would be amazing for the industry. The government though, on the other hand, when they get involved, especially the federal government, it complicates things. Well, the FDA can get involved depending on how they schedule cannabis, and that could really put a wrench in the works into the industry. They could apply a federal cannabis excise tax because if they eliminate the 280E tax code, well, they're used to making revenue, the IRS and the federal government, from the cannabis industry. Even though it's an illegal industry, they still recognize illegal trades. You just can't have any write-offs, right? So they receive a lot of revenue from that 280E tax code. So if they eliminate it because now cannabis is legal, they're going to replace it with something because they want that money. And if they institute a federal excise tax, that could really make cannabis expensive across the board. So I just get nervous. And then like you just said, what if other states legalize and they allow over a supply, and all of a sudden that kind of ruins the market, the wholesale market in other states, because they can go across state lines. But then again, if I could also mail cannabis through the mail system or UPS or FedEx, just like direct to consumer, that might actually bolster me. So it just depends on what side of the industry you're on. If you're a manufacturer, a product maker, so I see different angles from it. I don't know how it's all going to roll out because it's a big issue, but it would be nice if maybe they eased into it. Give us banking to start, kind of ease into it. And because existing operators, I want to have a chance to survive federal legalization. But if they do it in a way where it's like you have to be a big corporation to survive it because the FDA got involved, then I don't want it. I want to be a silo in California for as long as possible until I get strong enough and I have multiple licenses here so that when federal legalization happens, I have enough capital to roll out or handle any issues that federal legalization might bring up.
Thank you. Timeka, I mean, your thoughts, surviving legalization, right, means ultimately, will federal legalization help people survive? Well, as Hab pointed out, maybe.
Yeah, I agree with so many things that Hab said. I think that the community is very divided about this particular discussion, and you can get into some pretty heated arguments with just about anybody at any conference right now. Talking about rescheduling versus descheduling. I am very much in the descheduling camp. I think that if we get rescheduling, we're going to create a whole bunch of new problems. We're going to have a whole new industry that we may all not be able to be any kind of a part of. So it could kind of go overnight to like, none of you can play anymore. All of this is done. And now it's only going to be the pharmaceutical companies who are playing this game. So I think that conversation is incredibly important. There are a lot of MSOs at the top of things that have really been pushing for rescheduling versus descheduling, and I think that that there's not a more important topic when it comes to federal legalization right now.
And Nam, what's your kind of position on it? Do you think people can survive here in California and other markets without ultimately federal legalization? Do you think, like Hab said,
federal legalization is an inevitability. It's happening. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. I think that it's going to be something like 3 to 5 years until we see what we consider weed to be legal nationally. I think we will see steps in different things. Maybe interstate commerce was going to be able to be happening before federal legalization. Maybe there will be some little banking that happens, some little things that they test out. But I think that we have a little ways to wait, but it is coming. And, it is all being negotiated right now. So we have to be very loud about, as operators in the space, about how we see these things and how we want them to go as well.
Yeah, jump on that now. Let's get into it.
Yeah, from our standpoint, I'm personally torn. Obviously, no federal legalization will help, but I'm scared of how they're going to tax us. And as a small mom and pop operator, that can go either way. It could help us, or it could really just basically destroy us. And I basically am out of business because federal legalization, right? But coming from a standpoint of a California distributor, right? If the taxes were fair, I think federal opening up lines would obviously help California operators, right? I don't think they can grow the quality of the cannabis that we have here in California just because of the climate, the experience of the growers. It just can't be duplicated, right? There's Florida oranges for a reason. It's not oranges from Nebraska. It's going to be Napa and Sonoma wines. It's going to be the cannabis from California is going to be really sought after. It's going to really help California operators. But I'm still scared of how they're going to do that taxes, because no matter how good in demand we have for California cannabis, if the taxes ruin it all, we'll just all be dead anyways. So,
Right. So, that's, I guess, something to talk about too, from the perspective of, surviving legalization as a cultivator, surviving legalization as a manufacturer. How important is opening more retail markets, to your, the cultivating community that you represent here to the dispensaries in Southern California?
oh, very, very important. I mean, if you look at the numbers in the past few years, at one point there was more distributors than dispensaries. Like, how the fuck is that that doesn't work out. Like, anyone can do the math. That is not good supply and demand right there, right? So we definitely need to open up more dispensaries. The distributors will figure it out. The guys that know how to do it will then survive. It'll just come down to probably a few handfuls, and that sucks. But
do you think that
most
would help
likely
your
it's gonna happen.
cultivators too? Do you think opening those new markets is something that they need to place their product?
Oh yeah, I'll tell you this. If they had, I deal with a lot of farmers, right? And let's just be real, they all play both sides of the fence. And they all tell me, if this side of the legal fence was lucrative enough and was stable enough and they had enough outlet to move their product, they would put all of it over here. They wouldn't have to worry about the other side. But I know they all play a little bit on the other side. And you know what? They're just doing whatever they can to survive. Most cultivators in California, from Northern California, Southern California, indoor guys, they're small mom and pop, right? They're the sole investor. They maybe have a friends and family invested. Yes, there are a couple, bigger guys, but majority of us are small operators, and it would definitely help, right?
And so, Timeka, right, like one of the things that is this huge mission of this show is to bring retail stores to every city in California. But the city of Los Angeles, like, how much are they missing out on right now with the license program not in its full robust nature?
Yeah, I mean, the social equity licensing program in Los Angeles has been waiting for these retail licenses to come online for years and years. We had a whole licensing phase where there were cultivators, manufacturers, and distributors. So, LA was pumping all this beautiful flower coming out, beautiful products, nowhere to sell them other than the grandfathered in original medical dispensaries. And if you didn't know those folks, you're not going to get on their shelves. It's very expensive. It's a very insular community of kind of OGs who were in the scene. So you're either with them or you're outside of them. And a lot of the new folks, the social equity folks, they don't know those original kind of license holders. So we're waiting for all of these social equity licenses to come on board, including myself, who is a phase 3 round 1 licensee. And let me tell you,
was there 100 in that round?
So
was it a little bit less?
There were originally 100, and then everything went wrong with the LA license application process. There were some inconsistencies. There was some hijinks, we'll call it. There was an audit. The audit found that there was a lot of problems. There was a lawsuit that was brought by the Social Equity Owners and Workers Association, of which I'm a member, and they were able to obtain 100 additional licenses through that round. So that's actually how I have a license. I was one of the top 200, not one of the top 100 of those licenses.
Wow.
So I was actually like number 235 or something in the numerical order. So I got by the skin of my teeth. And let me tell you, like about 150 of the other phase 3 round 1 abandoned licensees through this round, trying to find a location is a needle in a haystack. It is absolutely impossible. Let's say you find a location. 9 times out of 10, that landlord is not going to lease to you, you cannabis business, you. Next, if you do find somebody, they're like, sweet, you think this location is compliant? Whatever I usually charge for the security deposit, times that by 5. That's what you'll be paying. You'll be putting a personal guarantee down on that social equity applicant who is low income from a disproportionately impacted area. Good luck with that, So and that's if you're lucky. This is a lucky scenario that you have found this place that is compliant and you're paying 5 times what you would normally pay, right? You're now winning because you have at least found a location. So it's almost impossible right now. You need to be a map specialist. You need to get on that license map and look at people who have put in pre-applications, temporary applications, people who are already existing, and make sure that any location you look at is, taking that into account. It is almost impossible. I have done licensing and compliance as a specialty in my career for several years all over the country. And as an applicant, I am myself having a hell of a time trying to find a compelling property, just a compliant property. Forget compelling. This could be a property in an alleyway. There is no parking. Does it have sensitive use? Is it not in undue concentration? These are almost impossible right now. So there has to be a change. There has got to be a change on the state level, considering sensitive uses, especially for social equity. There's got to be a change on the municipal level in the ability to kind of start to normalize and educate these landlords to allow for new retailers to open.
Right. And, Hab, from that perspective, you have a good we all talk about tax reform, and that's a meaningful thing. Do you think that the state, if we were going to approach it, it might be that a statewide blanket statement, Prop 215 requires, so in January 1st, 2024, every city in the state of California will have to allow the opening of a medical delivery license in their community, which will be allowed to have product on hand, business license, place to work from. So do you think that that's something that would make sense ultimately in a state level?
I don't have any insight on that, but I see something like that very hard to happen. To have happen. I don't necessarily think that the state's just going to focus on that part of the industry.
I actually think, though, the industry will have an easier time passing that than they would tax reform.
I agree.
Because of your point. Because as long as you're not taking our money that we're bilking off of you, right? All right. So listen, everybody. This has been one of those. This is a milestone moment in that here we are at the beginning of 2023. It's not an election year, so we're not going to see a lot of action until next year, right? In terms of political actual voting, right? But that's when, it's lobbying to a certain degree, it's activism to another degree, it's policy making. There are ways to affect it. So, from that perspective tonight, surviving is thriving right now. And to all the brands and the brand ambassadors here tonight, I want to say that's important to take to heart. Now, to end out any panel that I host, I like to look at my guests and say, listen, I've been asking questions. I've been trying to guide the conversation tonight. Is there anything that you want to talk about that you didn't get a chance to express that I didn't ask a question about? And Nam, I'll start with you. We're in closing now. So this is, any thoughts you have or anything you didn't get to say or would like to cover?
It was actually a subject that we were talking about earlier before the show started is, my concern is the cash flow between distro and the brand and the dispensary, right? And what we're seeing right now is I think 52% of retailers are 90 days plus behind on their invoices. And that puts the pressure down the line to the distributor, who then puts the pressure onto the brand, and then the brand onto their supply chain, which is the farmer or the manufacturer. And that just hurts, right? And what we need to do here is, as a whole, as an industry, 2 things are going to happen. One thing's going to happen, and here's the 2 options. Factoring is going to come into play, where a financial institution like, say, LeafLink right now is paying you, the supplier, when the product delivers, and they'll issue the terms to the retailer, but they take 4%, right? And I don't think there's enough margin in the current market for us to survive while the financial institution is taking 4%. what needs to happen in my eyes is learn what alcohol did and produce did, and small orders, weekly deliveries. It's a smaller risk for us suppliers to put the money out there. It's beneficial for the retailer also because they're constantly getting fresh product. And it just helps with the cash flow. I think if we can get into that kind of a rhythm, you watched it help alcohol and help food, and I think it's going to help us too as a cannabis industry trying to learn how to operate with each other, right? Like, how does the manufacturer operate with the brand and the distro? How does the distro operate and work with the retailer, and all the way back down the line to the farmer? I think we need to just do this where it's like smaller increments, frequent deliveries, and it's going to just be a lot better for us. We're not juggling the cash flow. There's not a financial institution making all the money while we're just going broke, and they're just sucking the life out of us because there's no federal banking. So we can't take a loan to help with the cash flow while we're juggling it, right? So these financial institutions are just sucking on us, like 4% for factoring. And we have to do it if we want to survive.
Hey, man, that was really insightful, man. Factory is something I've known from the apparel industry.
Yeah.
It's a very common industry. There's probably a lot of people who could activate in that space financially real quick.
And look at what it did to the fashion industry, and it slowly ate it away, right? It slowly takes the money out of that pot of our money as cannabis operators and putting it into their pocket, and eventually their pocket's bigger than ours, and it just sucked the life out of that industry. And I don't think we should let it happen here. We should not let factoring happen. As a distro, has to work with them and just do smaller deliveries, right? Just no risk. I get my money every week. It's a little bit, and I can pass it on down the line to the farmer.
Right. Amen. Timeka, do you have anything that you'd like to speak to that we didn't cover or I didn't bring up?
And I love this factoring conversation because, as a tiny brand, thinking about pushing into new territories and knowing that there are brands who are literally shuttering right now because half of their retail clients aren't paying them. Sometimes factoring starts to sound like, well, you know what? I'm paying a percentage to get my money back so I can continue to produce and let the money people go after that money, So it's
a
like
slow death.
Yeah, it's just interesting, and it's like this whole conversation of like, what side of the coin are you on, and what, where are your pain points? Who are you, and what are your pain points, right? And I think that my kind of point that I wanted to talk about as my kind of parting gift here to the stage is just, as a small, equity, Black-owned, Asian-owned brand, we would not be able to continue to survive without being able to have really thoughtful collaborations with other brands and operators in the space. And I think that's really the only way any of us are going to continue to survive, is kind of figuring out interesting projects and creative ways that are not kind of set out for us, but kind of looking at the tools that we have. We have a delivery license over here. We have a lounge that we can smoke in over here. Do we need a consumption lounge license to make that into a compliant consumption lounge? We don't. We can actually deliver compliantly into that lounge and create a benefit to this retailer, create a benefit to the community, to have this safe space, to have this event. And that's something that brands can then help control with their retail delivery partners. I think that these types of projects, the Black Box project that we just took part in, bringing together Black-owned brands and selling them in Black-owned retailers, really amplifying all of our brands and not trying to act as though we're only in competition with each other, because obviously we are not. So I just think that to continue to survive, we have to think about radical ways that we can build each other up and build each other's businesses as we continue to try to, keep things going, keep the lights on.
Hey, thanks for that. It was just really insightful. And Hab, would you like to collaborate with Biko and get
I'm
something?
all about collaborating.
Give us some of that good distillate. We'll turn it into something great.
That's for good.
Make it happen here on stage. But Hab, is there anything you'd like to add that we didn't ask about, we didn't cover?
Well, yeah, thank you, Chris. I feel rather fortunate, actually. I'm actually from the city of LA, but I moved to Long Beach for the cannabis industry. had my business going about 5 years now. Moved my family here. I committed to Long Beach, and I'm actually feeling proud about it because as I hear some of the trials and tribulations from other groups and other cities, I realize that Long Beach has a lot to offer the cannabis community, the industry. One, we have places like the Cannabis Capitol that throw amazing events and places for us to congregate, get together, educate, which is amazing. So thank you for always hosting these types of get-togethers. And, the LBCA, which I'm a big part of, they educate and advocate constantly. We have a 8-week course with the Long Beach City College where we teach cannabis as an 8-week program. I teach the distribution course on that. And we also do quite a bit of lobbying work through the city and the state. And just to give you a quick example, back when cannabis was illegal, the founders of the LBCA and a lot of the original license holders here had to really pound on doors and get support, and then they would find friendlies within the city council that they would share their stories with and finally got their support from. And eventually those city council people either became the current mayor or they graduated up to state assembly. And so we now have friendlies through that process. And it's a constantly evolving process to kind of have that open line of communication with your city. And I kind of feel proud that all that legwork was done. So by the time I came in and joined the community, it was already kind of mature enough where we could actually do something with it. And that's kind of like a model that other cities have to do. Like, we're organized here in Long Beach. I feel proud of that. And maybe LA is too big to organize collectively, and they have a lot of little organizational factions.
We're getting it together. We're getting it together.
Well, I think you should. And I think, listen, I left LA because they don't have their shit together, and they're getting it together, but it's going to take some time. And so I'm pretty proud of that. So shout out to Long Beach, shout out to LBCA, shout out to the Cannabis Capitol.
Amen. All right. Well, hey, everyone, this has been a great episode. I want to thank this panel. Can you help me thank them with me, right? I mean, what a great job, guys. Really appreciate you being part of this. Our story here is going to continue forward. We'll be back in March with another edition of Cannabis Capitol's Pop Politics. I want to thank the Cannabis Capitol team, John Bayless, Matt behind the board, Brian, Cassidy, Aiden. All you guys are awesome. Chef Ross for feeding y'all, right? And Brent for doing some hospitality and service. So once again, live from the Cannabis Capitol studios, this is Pop Politics, and we'll see you next month.